Okay, so my name is Avi Landa. I'm a mental health practitioner. I'm a licensed clinical counselor here in the state of Maryland. So I do run a private practice on top of the fact that I'm also mashgiach at TA in Baltimore for the middle school, guidance counselor in the high school. I do work here in Ner Yisrael in the Mechina, also with the high school boys. That's basically my background. And I'd like to give you over from a professional perspective some basic ideas when it comes to mental health, understanding what you might be seeing a little bit, raising your awareness to be able to detect things a little bit better and more effectively, and then have an understanding of what might be done in further next steps to deal with certain issues that might come up. At the end, I'm happy to give out my phone number or email address, whatever is the best way for you guys to get in touch with me. And really the bottom line of the entire presentation that I'm going to give to you, which is going to be a quick presentation. We're really only going to be touching on a lot of more deep points, just so that you guys can have a little bit of an awareness, a little bit of an experience with some different mental health issues and some mental health strategies that can come up over the course of the summer. I know a lot of you guys, first of all, I'll just say that I'm really impressed with this program. The schedule that you guys have and the learning that you're doing and all that is very impressive how you're spending your summer. And Mirza Hashem, it should be with a lot of hatzlacha. And I wanna just share with you some basic wisdom on these topics. Obviously, there's a lot more to say, but we want to try to do it in a very quick amount of time, very short amount of time. Okay, so the bottom line rule of everything that I'm going to discuss with you today is that when you're in doubt, when you have a red flag raised in your mind that there's something suspicious, something off going on, speak about it with someone. You never have anything to lose by speaking it out with someone. Rabbi Rosenbaum or Rabbi Green, Rabbi Cooper, or myself. And again, at the end, I'm happy to give out my phone number. You can get in touch with me directly. It's never a bother. And to speak out any particular concern, any particular suspicion you might have, you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. If you keep it to yourself, certain patterns might go unrecognized, and something that might not seem too seriously was actually something that seriously did need to be addressed. If it's something that's minor and light, the fact that we're keeping track of it is something that's important for us. And even if no intervention has to be had, still, better safe than sorry that you spoke it out, you brought it to our attention. That is Rabbi Green, Rabbi Cooper, Rabbi Rosenbaum, or myself. So let's go through some, also I think I'm supposed to say that you guys should all have seen the NCSY Conduct Policy and Behavioral Standards Manual. If you haven't seen that, then speak to your superiors to get a copy of that and enjoy the read through that. Now let's go through some basic common psychological issues that might come your way and you might see in many people, and especially in some of the campers that you might be interacting with, I think some of you on a regular basis. So we're going to talk about the most common psychological issues that affect more people. They're more common. And those basically are anxiety, ADHD, being on the autism or Asperger's spectrum, depression, and then substance abuse. So let's talk about some of these and give you a really brief overview of what these ideas mean and how you might recognize them in some of your campers. And with that understanding, A, you'll be able to alert us as to what you might be seeing better because you'll have a little bit of an education. Your minds have been working along those lines a little bit. But B, you'll also be able to know what to or what not to do because you'll understand what exactly is going on with this child, if that's in fact what is going on in terms of him being diagnosed with one of these. So anxiety is something that we all have. We all experience anxiety. A person gets up to speak in front of a crowd. He has a little bit of anxiety when he walks up. A person goes hiking in the woods and he's alone and he sees something brown and furry in the distance moving. There's anxiety that comes upon a person. That's normal. It's healthy. It's how Hashem made us, and we're supposed to be like that. What it does for us is it focuses us a little bit more intensely. It gives us a little bit of a boost of energy, and we do a better job than we would have done otherwise. We fight or flight. We deal with the situation. We accomplish in a little bit more of a focused and energized way than we would have otherwise because of anxiety. It's a positive part of who we are. The problem, and when it becomes a disorder, is when you have a situation that a person is overwhelmed with anxiety and there's nothing brown and furry moving in the distance. And yet they're sitting in the comfort of this dining room feeling like, is that a bear over there? But of course, there's no bear. And there's nothing dangerous. And that's something that can be incapacitating for a person. It's something that can really take over their ability to socialize smoothly and healthily and happily, to feel normal, to feel comfortable, to feel relaxed. They can't feel any of those things. And too much anxiety, with it occurring all the time for a person, even when there's no danger, even when there's no specific task to accomplish, is something that can be overwhelming for a person and really incapacitating. And that's what we mean when anything is a disorder. Nothing that a person affects that a person can be affected by, that we're going to talk about, if it does not negatively impact their life, it's not a disorder. Say a person has a phobia of a bridge. They can never drive over a bridge, but they live in a city which is 300 miles from any bridge, and never for their entire lives will they ever have to go over a bridge. There's no disorder. They're a perfectly fine, healthy individual. Because who cares that they can't drive over the bridge? But anxiety generally will, if it's to that extreme, will affect people in negative ways. And you want to be able to recognize it, to let us know about it if you see it, and to be able to intervene in subtle ways that would be helpful and not harmful to the anxiety. So basic reassurances and relaxation techniques are not going to help. You tell the kid, just breathe a little bit, just relax, drink a hot drink, go to sleep a little earlier tonight. They don't seem to help. That indicates, again, it's more than just a specific thing that the kid's nervous about, but an anxiety disorder. Not necessarily, but it's one piece of evidence. In addition, the kid seems to be different than everyone else, right? If you're going to some really crazy, dangerous activity, and that kid just doesn't want to do it, but so do like 6 or 7 other kids, that might be normal. Maybe that's a general normal thing for a child not to want to engage in that activity. And even though, yes, it's the midah of anxiety, the kid is anxious about going and doing that activity, but that's normal. Again, that's part of healthy anxiety. Whereas if he's the only one consistently not wanting to do a certain activity, or a social anxiety, he's the only one consistently not willing to go branch out, try to make friends, interact with other people at a normal level. Look, everyone has different personalities. Some people are more outgoing, some people less. But he's clearly to the extreme different than everyone else. And here's the key, he doesn't seem happy with it. He's not b'menuchas hanefesh that, I finally have some free time to play chess against myself. That's the person that has that personality. Good for him. But a person who really, you could tell he would want to go and interact with, but something's stopping him. And it's upsetting him. It's taking away from his contentment, his menuchas hanefesh. That's, again, a piece of evidence that we would want you to see for us, to let us know about, as, again, all part of the diagnostic criteria to diagnose someone with an anxiety disorder. That's the basic idea of anxiety. When it comes to dealing with anxiety, you want to understand that just telling the person to try to avoid the anxiety is not going to help. As an example, OCD is a subset of anxiety. Let's say a person is OCD clinically with touching doorknobs. Can't touch a doorknob. He's deathly afraid he will die from the germs on that doorknob. So what do you do for that person? Well, here's a simple solution. Tell him to put on gloves. Thin gloves. You can do everything with them on. Isn't that a simple solution? And the answer is no. You're actually making the anxiety worse if you do that, because now his own brain will ask itself subconsciously, why am I wearing gloves every time I need to touch a doorknob? And the answer that his own brain will give himself subconsciously is, because doorknobs are dangerous to touch without gloves. And you're actually reinforcing and strengthening the anxiety disorder, which is exactly what you don't want to do. In fact, the way to treat that, which is not up for you to do, you're just there to be the eyes and ears for us, but the way to treat that would actually be to go through some form of exposure where you're exposing the person slowly but surely, or sometimes intensely, to what really isn't a frightful situation, a doorknob, and eventually you can break down that anxiety and certainly lower the volume of that voice screaming at him, don't touch the doorknob. So it's a complex process, but the key that I want to give over to you is, just because you think of a common sense solution to a particular problem, if it really seems like it's something off on a mental health level, don't just jump to making these solutions. Okay, you want to suggest the kid to go to sleep earlier at night or give him a hot drink or something like that and see if that little thing works 1-2 times, fine. But if not, make sure to give it over to us so we can intervene in the right way. ADHD. ADHD is something which is quite common. Obviously, there's a whole controversy as far as whether or not it's overdiagnosed or not. But the basic idea of ADHD is impulsivity. It's the part of the brain that normally filters and monitors impulses, and it gets you to not just go and act automatically based on impulse. That's what ADHD is all about. And I'm talking about ADD, ADHD. It's all the same thing. In fact, there's controversy as to whether or not the two should be two different names. Because all it means when a person is distracted so easily and so debilitatingly because of the ADHD is, hey, you're supposed to be paying attention to me. But you noticed a crumb fall out of your friend's mouth when he was eating the donut, and instantly everyone will have an impulse to look at that. But most people who don't have ADHD will then have an immediate, without even trying, automatic, split-second next thought of, okay, but I'm paying attention to someone talking now. So I'm not going to totally divert my focus to that. Whereas the ADHD person is missing that automatic step in the brain. And therefore the impulse, they'll go with the impulse. A fly flies by, now they'll go with that. Another thing happens, they're going to go with that. Every impulse, you just go with it. There's no automatic, so to speak, filter system in the brain, what psychologists call executive functioning in the brain that says, wait, split second, without a decision, without a conscious thought, wait, let me stay focused on class, on shir, on my chavrusa, on whatever. And so it's impulsivity. It's a lack of being able to control impulse, lack of impulse control. That's the basic idea of ADHD. And it's not a disability in knowledge. This is a very important point because it also affects how we might deal with an ADHD kid. It's not a disability in knowledge. It's not that the kid doesn't know that the right thing to do in this social context is to look at the person and listen to the person speaking. They know it. Well, if you give them a written test, how do you handle the following 10 social situations? They'll get 100. No problem. They know it. But if all that's bothering them is ADHD, it's a disability in accessing that knowledge in the heat of the moment. Let's contrast that with the next one, which is Asperger's, or being on the autistic spectrum. That is actually a disability in knowledge. That is that the child has a hard time learning and understanding what to do. So as an example to bring out this point, let's say we set up a social skills training group. We gather a group of boys together and we make up role plays of different social scenarios that can come up, and we show them, here's what you should or shouldn't do in these scenarios. So the Asperger's child will greatly benefit from such a program because you're teaching to them in real life and role plays how to act and how not to act, and they're gaining that knowledge. But the ADHD kid will be bored and probably misbehave throughout the entire social skills training group. Why? Because he knows it already and he's right for being bored. You're not helping him. So how do you help the ADHD kid who has the knowledge? It's not a disability in knowledge like Asperger's or autism. It's a disability in accessing that knowledge in the moment. How do you help them? And the simple answer to that is, okay, medications can be very helpful, and they do address, according to many, more and more research is showing that the stimulant medications actually address the source of the problem neurologically. But behaviorally, the way to help is to keep things fresh, on the tip of their tongue, on the top of their mind. Because the less grabbing they need from the back of their mind, so to speak, to get that knowledge to the front of their minds, to affect their decision, the more of a chance they have to actually act with that information. So reminders, for example, let's say you see the ADHD kid or the impulsive kid, same thing, is on the bus. And every time he's on the bus or in a certain activity or playing a particular sport, he always has a hard time controlling himself with A, B, or C. So before that all happens, you want to give that kid a reminder. Remember, try to be careful with A, B, or C. Now, it's great that you gave him that reminder 2 hours ago. The day before, that's not going to help for him because he's got to be able to have an advantage in accessing that information. And if you keep things as much as possible at the forefront of their minds and on the tips of their tongues, that's what's going to help them access that knowledge in the heat of the moment. That's what you want to do with an ADHD boy. Whereas, again, like we said with Asperger's, autism, that category, it's a disability in knowledge. And you want to be able to explain in multiple ways and multiple techniques, social skills groups, things like that, to be able to help them understand better. Let's go on to depression. When you look at depression, again, everyone has sad days. That's not depression. Clinical depression is, like we said before, it's a disorder. It means that it is a disability. It means that it affects negatively your ability to go on throughout the day. It means that when there's an activity that you know, again, this kid's not a kid who hates baseball. Oh, so he's not playing baseball. He's depressed. No, of course not. He doesn't like baseball. But he seems to, you can tell he would like to do certain things. And it's not when you speak to him and asking questions of the boy is crucial. Because when you ask the boy, well, why don't you want to go do this activity? He could say, I don't like that activity. And he seems to be telling the truth, and there's nothing wrong. He could say, well, I'm really nervous around those guys. That might be some sort of an anxiety. Or he could say, and this is where the depression would come in, I'm just not in the mood to do anything. I just want to take a nap and kind of escape it all. There's no greater escape than taking a nap. And many people struggling with depression sleep a lot. Because when you go to sleep, everything just shuts down. You don't have to deal with life. You don't have to deal with anything. And so you want to look out for, is the sadness so deep? Is the lack of hope, the hopelessness, so strong and intense that the kid wants to sleep, he loses appetite, he's not interested in doing anything. If you have a kid who's super excited about playing chess, but really doesn't like sports at all, and therefore a lot of the day he just stays out of the activities, he's not depressed. If he had clinical depression, he'd not be super excited in anything. He would have lack of excitement or interest in anything, not extra excitement, but only in specific areas. Depression is a problem that affects the person's ability to get excited about anything. So that's a great way to tell, am I dealing with just a sad, bad day? Or am I dealing with a depression? Am I dealing with a more introverted kid? Or am I dealing with depression? Is there anything he can get really excited and have a great time smiling about? Or is there nothing? And that might be depression. That's something we would definitely want to look at. This last common mental health issue that I want to discuss with you for today is something that really complicates everything we discussed till now. Hopefully you guys remembered all the details that I told you about anxiety, ADHD, autism, Asperger's, and depression, the most common disorders. And again, the point here is not that you can take a test on what I'm telling you at the end, because obviously you're not going to do too well. The point is, maybe I'm wrong, maybe you guys are really smart. But the point of this is just to get your mind thinking about some of these things so that when you see certain things, it just makes you think a little bit more. It just raises your awareness a little bit more. And again, you'll give over to the other people, the administration, to be able to look more closely at something. That's the point of all this, just for you to get a little bit of an exposure to all these different concepts. This last one really complicates everything we discussed because it can mimic, it can produce symptoms of any of the previous disorders that we discussed, and that's substance abuse. Everybody reacts differently to smoking marijuana, to trying any of the harder drugs, to drinking alcohol. Everyone reacts a little bit differently. Sometimes a person can drink or smoke pot or do other psychoactive drugs that for them makes them very anxious and paranoid. And it looks like an anxiety disorder maybe. For another person, or even for that same person the next day, because the situation is different. It's always different. When you get into biology of human beings, it can always be different. Even day to day it can be different. That substance can affect the person and make them seem depressed. They just want to sleep all day. Or the substance can make them seem totally impulsive. They're going crazy, not thinking before any of the decisions that they're making. Or it can make them seem like off, like why are they doing these weird, awkward things, like they have Asperger's or autism or something like that. So substance abuse really can mimic and produce symptoms in all of these different common mental health issues that we might find, and therefore it's something to always look out for. Some things that you might notice that would indicate that it is substance abuse versus some of the other things, which would be, these would be the things to rule out when we're trying to see if it would be one of these other mental health disorders, would be look for inconsistencies from their general personality. If you see generally they are a certain way, but every afternoon at a certain time, or every Tuesday, or twice a week, they seem to be exhibiting clinical signs of depression, or anxiety, or ADHD impulsivity, then that's strange. Somebody who's struggling with a mental health disorder, the imbalance of the chemicals in the brain, which is basically the source of everything we're discussing here, by the way, which is how all the medicines work. They mess around with those balances to try to restore balance of those chemicals. So you want to look at if there's particular times during the week where they seem to be struggling with these things, then probably there's some type of substance causing it. Now you could have that in a legal, okay way to be aware of. An ADHD kid might take medicine in the morning that wears off in the afternoon. And every afternoon he might seem one way, or evening, and every morning he might seem another way. That's because it is a substance that is producing at least some of what you're seeing in the morning and then the wearing off of that substance in the afternoon. But if you're seeing a kid who seems to exhibit extreme signs of one of these mental health disorders once a week or twice a week or at a particular time each day, that is definitely a red flag for substance abuse, because what's causing an all of a sudden change? If it was a real disorder, it would be something that would be much more consistent. In general, you'll see it affecting things like energy, motivation level, appetite, the ability to tolerate frustration. They'll get easily angered. Avoiding eye contact is something that often happens. So these are just different things to look out for. Like I said, it's going to be difficult, and you're going to have to leave it up to professionals and administration to be able to determine what exactly is happening. Sometimes there'll be obvious signs. If you see a kid walking into the woods every single day at 4-something p.m. and every day that's what he's doing, so you want to notice that and definitely provide us with that piece of evidence so that we can best figure out what's going on. Okay, so that is the overview of mental health disorders that I wanted to share with you. Again, just as a way of whetting your appetite, opening your minds to the ideas of these disorders, not that you should be well educated in them, but that you might pick up on and notice things that you wouldn't have before, just hearing about the general ideas involved in these disorders. The next topic I want to talk to you about is basic psychological safety. And there are different things, depending on how much interaction you're going to have with the kids, there are different things that you can notice, but also really help out with in a significant way. As an older person, as a role model, as a person that has a little bit of an authority, you really can help out in an amazing way, in ways in which the administration can't help out. Like a counselor, there are ways in which you guys can help out tremendously. Let's talk first about bullying. So, bullying is a hot topic that is discussed a lot nowadays, and rightfully so. We understand more and more that how, if it's consistent, if it's ongoing, any one particular act, unless it's an extremely, to the extreme, intense physical harm or something like that, obviously anything like that has to be stopped immediately and told to the administration immediately. Any threat to safety on a physical level has to immediately be stopped and told over, and even on an emotional level if it's something to the extreme. But even if it's not something so extreme, if it's obvious bullying and it's repeated and it's consecutive and it's consistent and it's nonstop, it can really do damage to a person. And instead of the summer being a time for growth and happiness for this kid, he could be just batted down and batted down and batted down over the course of the summer until he's damaged, literally damaged by the end of the summer. And so we want to take notice of these types of things happening when we hear mean and bullying type things being said and done from one person to another, or from one group to another group or to another person. So you want to listen to what others are saying, what others are seeing. You want to be able to get a whole picture, and you want to see what changes can be made. That's step number one. Well, no, all these steps are not in order. They're just multiple ideas to consider when it comes to bullying. One idea, go over to the victim and see, are you doing anything to bring this upon you? Sometimes the kid is acting in a very annoying and even slightly aggressive way to the person who's the quote-unquote bully, and that person's really just reacting to that. And if that kid would stay away or would be less annoying in certain ways, that would be the most amazing piece of advice for him, because now the bullying is going to stop. So that's a great thing to look out for. But, of course, there are real instances of bullying that occur. So how do you help and deal with that? So one of the biggest rules I think apply when it comes to bullying is that it is always best if the victim himself can solve the problem without needing a superior, an authority figure to come in and figure out a way to forcibly stop it. Often those forced stops are only temporary or only public, and in private things continue. Is there a way for the victim to be able to be empowered and encouraged to stop the bullying himself? And the answer is there's a great way to do it. Obviously, it's no guarantee, but it's worth a try. Have the victim go over to the bully and say something nice to the effect of, you probably didn't even realize it, I'm not blaming you, but what you're saying, what you're calling me is really hurting me, please stop. Now, you might think, yeah, sure, you could try that, but what are the chances that that's going to work? Now, here's the key part to it. It has to be one-on-one in private. If Reuven feels like he's being bullied by Shimon, and Reuven approaches Shimon, but Levi, Yehuda, and Yisachar are all standing around listening, and Reuven says to Shimon, please stop calling me that name. Shimon's first response and main feeling is going to be, how am I going to look in front of Levi, Yehuda, and Yisachar? How am I going to look in front of those guys? like I'm wrong, like I'm weak, or like I'm tough. He's wrong. He deserves what he has coming to him. And he's only going to strengthen himself in the bullying behavior that he's involved in. He's only going to strengthen himself in it. So there has to not be an audience. The moment there's an audience listening to that conversation, it's lost. But if he goes over to Ruvain, if Shimon goes over to, or let's say Shimon, I don't remember who we said. If Shimon is the victim, and Shimon goes over to Ruvain, and he says to Ruvain, do you mind, I just want to ask you a quick question in the corner of the room over here. Can you come over here? Out of earshot. Can you come into this empty room over here for a second? I have a quick question. Out of earshot from other people. And he says, hey, what you said, what you're saying to me, what you're calling me, I know you probably don't realize it. It's probably something that you don't realize, and realize how much it's hurting. It really hurts. Please stop. In that case, he has a much bigger chance of the bully saying, all right, I'm sorry, because it's in private. It makes a world of difference. Even if the bully's response, which can often happen, is in private. Oh, come on, stop being such a baby, and he walks out. Still, because it was in private and he didn't have to defend himself in front of a crowd, you planted a seed in the bully's mind. And the next time he has the opportunity to call that victim a name, he's going to much more likely, no guarantees, but much more likely think twice before he goes ahead and does that. Because you planted that seed there in a private way. That is a much more powerful way of planting the seed than if there's any crowd or audience around. So that's an amazing piece of advice that you can give to a boy if he feels like one or a group of people are bullying. What if it's a group of people? No problem. You go over to one person in that group that you think you'd have the best chance with. See if it works. And if it does, and he seems to not be involved as much, go over to one more person in that group, one by one. That's the best way to solve it if it can work. It doesn't always work, but if it can work, you're allowing the victim himself to solve the problem and giving him the tools to potentially solve the problems in the future. Again, remember the first step, which is he doing anything to bring it upon himself, in which case maybe small changes can be made on that end. Another thing to think about when it comes to bullying is that if this doesn't work and the bullying continues, ultimately it's indifference that works. Because the root of bullying is that the bully feels that he has power over the victim. How do I have power over the victim? Because the second I call you a name, you want to punch me. So look how I control you. I can control you to have to react by calling you that name. I have control and power over you. Or you scream back at me, or you cry, or you run and tell on me. Even if it's a negative reaction as far as I'm concerned, I still have power over you. Or you give me the silent treatment. Is someone talking to me? I don't hear anyone talking. That's an extreme reaction. That's not a normal reaction. I'm making you react in extreme ways by calling you that name. It gives me a sense of power and control over you, and I will continue to do it. So how do you stop bullying based on that understanding of bullying? Simple. Indifference. That means that somebody calls me that name, I take out a book, and I just shrug my shoulders and just maybe read a paragraph in the book, or whatever you say. Like it doesn't bother me at all. Now, it might bother me inside, and it's going to require some acting skills. But if you can do that a number of times, the bully starts to get the feeling of, I do not have power over this person. I cannot get him to react in an extreme emotional or telling on me type of way. And now, I'm losing that power. So you know what the first thing that's going to happen is if you do this? If the victim successfully is indifferent, okay, whatever you say, and then read a book. If the victim is successful to be indifferent, you know what the first thing that's going to happen is? The bullying is going to get worse. It's going to become more extreme. Because the bully now feels like he's losing his power. He's losing his control over this kid. So he's going to step it up. If he can maintain that indifference, even with it going up a level, then eventually it will stop because the bully is going to see this is pointless. I'm not doing anything here. It's a waste of my time. I feel stupid doing it. I'll move on to someone else, or hopefully I won't do it to anyone else. But that is ultimately the tool that you want to empower the victim to use. And lastly, when it comes to bullying, you want to talk about the bystanders. So if you're with a group of kids that you're learning with or in some other capacity, you want to go over to some of the other kids that you know are not involved in the bullying and say, hey, when you see it happening, don't just stand by. Don't be a bystander. Get involved. Go over to the bully and say, hey, it's not cool what you're doing. Just stop. And if you go over with a group of guys, you don't have to worry that he's going to say, I'll bully you. I mean, power in numbers. He's going to feel less and less popular by what he's doing. You go over with 3 or 4 guys together, it's a tremendously powerful intervention to tell the bully, hey, come on. It's not cool what you're doing. Just stop. And you go over to the victim also as a bystander. And you say, hey, I'm here for you. Don't listen to what he's doing. But you do one more thing that's so much more powerful than just words, right? Because it's so nice for him to hear from you, a nice guy, hey, don't listen to him. But it hurt. It still hurt that I was called that name, that he said that thing to me, that he excludes me. And the kid, in fact, the victim feels excluded. He feels isolated. He feels not liked. So what can you do with an action as a bystander? And really, you can do this as kind of like staff, as like a counselor, but it's even more powerful, and you should, but it's even more powerful if you get a friend of his to do this. He comes over to him and says, hey, come, we're going to go to the court now. Come play with us. Come, let's go. We're making teams. Come. You include him in an activity. You include him in something that's happening, and he can feel a lot better and a lot more empowered to ignore the bully based on that. So the bystanders, you want to make sure both tell the bully, hey, it's not cool what you're doing. The more the better. And they go over to the victim as well, telling him, come on, join us, be in our group, let's play together. And that's something which could be very empowering to the victim as well. That's the basic ideas on bullying. Let's talk for a minute about inappropriate talk and touch. So obviously we live in a day and age that as the years go on, literally year by year, sometimes month by month, we are warned and warned again to be extra, extra, extra careful for our own protection. And I mean for your protection, not only for the child's protection, but for our own protection, to be extra careful and sensitive when it comes to dealing with kids. And the basic idea, the logic that goes into that is that there's a power differential. Since you are older, you're in a position of respect, and so on. A counselor's in a position of authority. So people will say that even if you just kind of suggested that the kid should do something, or hinted to it, because it would be normal that the child would feel uncomfortable to say no to you as opposed to a kid his age. And that's understandable because you're in a position of power over him, so to speak. So then you're going to be to blame for that. That's the basic logic that goes into this. There's a power differential when you're, so to speak, over the kid, older and in some sort of position of power over him. So we have to be extra, extra careful. We never want to be in an alone, closed, locked room with no windows or anything else like that, even for a second with a kid. Never. We never want to take one kid out in our car to go get a Slurpee, just one person, just one counselor, one colo guy, and the kid. You never want to do things like that. You always want there to be more people so that there's less of an image and less of a chance in reality of anything inappropriate happening or being said. Anything the kid says stop to, obviously you stop. Well, what if you're just joking around with him, right? You give him a pat on the back, which is totally fine, right? No hugs, but a pat on the back is still okay. You give him a pat on the back or a slap five, nice shot, and the kid, maybe it seems like he's joking, maybe not, says, no, please don't do that. You listen. If the kid doesn't want something done to him physically or encroaching on his personal space in any way, shape, or form, he doesn't like a way in which you refer to him or call him or discuss something with him, you stop. It's not your job to try to make sure that you can talk about a certain topic with him or act in a certain way with him or, come on, that's so babyish that you wouldn't want me to do that. I'm going to teach you. No, that's not your job. Maybe that's his parents' job. Maybe parents can speak to the school about that, but that is definitely not your job in a summer camp. And even when it comes to school, everything has to be worked out step by step with the parents. So if a kid ever says no or stop to anything, you stop immediately. You want to look out for what's going on between kids, not just you being careful to not do anything inappropriate with a kid, but what happens if you notice that one kid is doing something a little bit inappropriate with another kid? You want to notice that. You want to let us know. You want to let the administration know about that so we can further investigate and see what's going on. Sometimes you might see just one little act and it looks pretty innocent but a little off. But little do you know that Rabbi Green already got a similar complaint from another person who interacted with that person. So you want to give over the information so that the administration can collect all the information and make an informed decision. A lot of times these things start out very subtle and very innocently. Not that the person has malicious intent. But one child is sitting next to another child, and maybe he knows, but maybe he doesn't even know why he's saying this. And he says to his friend, they're sitting on the bed, your pajama pants look really soft. Can I feel the material? That's crossing a boundary. It's a subtle boundary because he's not even touching his body in any way, But that's not what we do. If you see two kids who are really close friends, that happens all the time. But if you see them kind of walking off into the woods, you see them often trying to have alone time, you see that when there's an activity, it's like really hard for them to separate. Any of these types of more extreme expressions of the intensity of the relationship, you want to notice and you want to give over to the administration. You want to see what else is going on so that we can stop things before anything inappropriate happens. I don't think you guys are going to be involved in waking up the boys at all, but I'll just say you never want to do anything physical to wake up the boys, even if the boy asks you, because we don't do physical things to the boys, period, even if they ask us. So what if a boy asks you, please pick me up over your head and twirl me around? We don't do those things with boys. We just don't. But what if the kid says, flip my bed over to wake me up? We don't do things like that, right? Sprinkle a little water on his face or something like that. If he begs you and genuinely asks you and you discuss it with the parents first, maybe. But even if the parents say, yes, flip my son's bed over, we don't do things like that. That's not what we do. Okay. We never ever joke with kids in threatening ways, right? So let's say a kid is just not listening, he's not behaving, so you pick up a baseball bat and say, you better listen. Of course, you never even had to have them. You never thought you were going to swing that bat. But isn't it like a cool or funny, even friendly way of doing it sometimes in the context? We don't do anything like that, even as a joke. And that brings us into another last two topics here when it comes to safety. We want to recognize any physical injuries that might take place, that might happen to a kid. Obviously, if we see it's a sports injury or anything like that, or it looks like it is, fine. But if we're noticing repeat occurrences of injuries, whether they are cuts, bruises, bite marks, extreme peeling of skin to blood, hair pulling, all these types of things we want to notice and again bring to the administration. You are in a position to notice these things better than perhaps an administrator is. And then again, worst comes to worst. You talk about something that didn't need so much talking about. We talk about it, we file it away, and we move on. But on the flip side, we notice something at an earlier stage, and we're able to really help out a kid in a way that otherwise could be terrible for the kid if we don't notice and we don't get that kid the help that he needs. So we want to look out for any type of self-injurious behavior. Strange cuts or bruises or stuff like that. Multiple lines for the kid to come and say, oh, well, I was cutting something with a scissor and I just kept missing the thing that I was cutting. Right? So that is strange. It's not a normal looking cut. All these types of things, especially if they're repeat occurrences, you want to let us know. How about a kid saying things that sound like suicide? How about if a kid is saying comments or phrases like, I just want to end it all. I can't bear thinking about dealing with it tomorrow. I don't want to have anything to do with life. No one would care if I would go missing. Things like that. So as professionals, we're going to assess whether or not that child needs to be immediately taken out of the current situation to be professionally assessed. A lot of that is going to have to do with, is there a particular time that the kid is talking about that he wants to end it all, so to speak? And is there a particular means or method that he's talking about that he wants to use? Either one of those, and certainly both of those together, make it a much, much more dangerous situation. But from your perspective, you're not looking for that. You're just looking to hear, are they saying things like that? Now, what if it's a joke, or what if it's obviously a joke? Right? The kid's playing basketball, he misses a shot, and he screams out, I'm going to kill myself. So that's it. Call the ambulance, Hatzalah, the police, everyone, they have to come arrest him. Of course not, right? The police would be here a lot, right? Of course not. However, and this might be news to some of you, but we do take that seriously to the extent that we would go over to that boy at the next play, at the next timeout, after that game to say, obviously you were just, right, when you said that you were joking, right? And the kid says, yeah, what do you mean? When I was just expressing my frustration. Say, I get it. But we got to come up with another phrase. Because it's such a serious topic, we can't even joke about it. So you got to say something else. And if the kid just thinks it's a big funny game, and he keeps doing it because, come on, we will take action just to make the point of, not because we're really worried about that kid, because we don't joke about that topic. We have to come up with another phrase for you to express your frustration. It should be clean, but not about suicide, not about killing yourself. We don't even joke about such things. And similarly, if a kid's just discussing a show that might be on on TV or on the internet that kids are discussing about suicide. The fact that they're discussing the topic of suicide doesn't necessarily mean that we're worried about this kid. But again, it's something to take notice of and let us know about, because if that's what they're discussing, first of all, they're in camp. They should be having a good time, not discussing such deep topics. That's not what the central focus of conversation should be. So it's a good thing to just talk to the kid about. But also, if the kid's obsessed with it, with that show, with that concept, again, it's something for us to just raise our awareness about, give it over to the administration so we can properly assess what exactly is going on and whether there needs to be any type of professional intervention. We want to be extra, extra careful. Sometimes it would seem like we're going overboard with certain things. But even if it's a 0.1% chance of death, that's not a risk we want to take. So we want to at least discuss, investigate, and see if further intervention needs to take place. Okay, I want to end off, just for the next 2 minutes, on some positives that I think you guys can impart and have with the boys. And the essential summary of that is that these are generally young kids. A lot of them are going to give over a tough guy situation, tough guy personality. You guys were there just a few years ago. I don't need your help. I don't need you to give me a compliment. I don't need your pat on the back, your slap five. Now, again, if they say don't do that, you don't do it. But they're going to say, I don't need you to be warm to me. I don't need you to be nice to me. I'm good. And the truth is that every single person benefits from compliments. Even when they act like that outside external toughness, often they're the ones that need even more, because that's their coping mechanism. The way they cope with life is by acting all tough on the outside, because they're not getting the warmth and the niceness throughout the year. And all of a sudden they come to camp and they have older guys who they look up to and respect, who will go out of their way to give them the compliment and say a nice word to them and be there for them. And it feels really good. You can actually melt that outside ice just a little bit. It's a huge opportunity for you guys to help out. Any questions or comments that the guys ask of you or say to you, do not ever dismiss them as what? That's the most ridiculous question I've ever heard. Take it all seriously. Be machshiv. Give the chashivas, give an importance to their questions, to their comments. Let them feel like you respect them. You're not their friend. You're an older advisor type staff person over them, and you're there to be nice to them, to compliment them, to be there in positive ways for these kids. If a kid wants to discuss a really sensitive topic with you, let's say a kid wants to discuss a private topic, a challenge that he is struggling with in Judaism, trying to stay away from a certain aveira. Let's say the kid is dealing with a situation at home that's challenging, and he wants to discuss these things with you. Absolutely, you can listen and be there for him to vent. If you start to hear some pretty extreme things, you've got to pass that on. If he seems to want to talk a lot about it and he really is looking for help, if you consider yourself an expert in these areas, go ahead and impart some wisdom. If you don't, discuss with the kid. Maintain trust in the relationship. Discuss with the kid, I really think we should bring in someone else who's more of an expert in this area. It can still stay totally confidential, but that person might really be able to help you. And then with his permission, with his guidance, how much to say, how little to say, who to go to in the administration, you then bring it to the next level. And we can really get the kid help in these sensitive areas and topics that he's looking for help with. Always be positive. Always be careful with all the physical stuff that we said, but always be positive and warm with the kids. And I'll leave you off with one quick story about how powerful you can be for another kid in ways that you might not even imagine. Dr. Pelkovitz says this story over all the time. There is a TA Rebbe, actually, it turned out, we found out afterwards, who got a phone call from a kid. And the phone call was from actually a kid who was now in his 20s, but he had this Rebbe in Shir years before. And he said, Rebbe, I just want to let you know you saved my life a few days ago. I said, what are you talking about? So let me tell you what happened. I was in your Shir years ago, and it went okay. You clearly cared about me. You even sent me a card on my birthday, which I loved. It really felt good to get that. And I left a school. I don't know if you know, after that year in your Shir, I was out of the school. I went through all sorts of difficult challenges and obstacles in my life. It eventually got to the point that I was out of all schools, I wasn't in a good situation, and I was contemplating suicide. I was in my bedroom holding the pills to commit suicide, and I was ready to go through with it. but I took one last look around my room. And when I looked around my room, I noticed on top of one place in my dresser, 6 or 7 cards that were there. Birthday cards that you kept sending to me on my birthday even after I was out of your shiur. A little birthday card that you mailed to me with a little nice message in it. And I looked at that group of cards there, and I thought to myself, someone does care about me. And I put the pills down. And I want you to know I'm in a program now to get myself help. You saved my life. Just once a year, this Rebbe thought about this kid for 2-3 minutes, buying him a card, filling it out, putting it in the mail. And that saved this kid's life. I'm telling you, you have no idea what potential little opportunity comes your way, and you can do something so unbelievable for a boy that's in camp. Be warm, be nice, be generous with the compliments, be generous with being there for the kids, showing them that you respect them and you want to be there for them while maintaining all the boundaries that we discussed. And Emir Hashem, you can not only have unbelievable success and atzlacha in the program that you're in, which is so chashuv, such an impressive program that you're all engaged in, but you'll, on top of that, be able to also positively influence all the kids that are around you who probably look up to all of you in the way in which you're living your lives already now. And Emir Hashem, you should continue to have atzlacha in everything that you're doing. Thank you.
Guys, one second.